to change that. President Obama 3 years ago was on the Today Show, and he said if he couldn't turn the economy around in 3 years, he'd be looking at a one-term proposition. We're here to collect. And by the way, he was on the Today Show again this morning, and on the anniversary of that statement, and he said he deserves a second term. Mr. President, you do not deserve a second term. You see, he set his own standard. He said if we let him borrow almost $1 trillion, he'd keep the unemployment rate below 8%. It has not been below 8% since. So he does not deserve it based upon that. Then how about some other promises he made? Remember, he also said that he was going to have an immigration plan, comprehensive immigration reform in his first year. Didn't do that either. And then there was Iran. Remember, he was going to have this policy of engagement, sit down with Ahmadinejad. Iran would obviously be dissuaded of their nuclear ambition. That hasn't happened either. And then there's the income of the American people. Do you realize that the median income in America has dropped 10% in the last 4 years? That hasn't worked. And then, of course, home foreclosures. People say, well, but that isn't all his fault. Oh, really? How about Dodd-Frank? This bill that came in did not make it more likely for banks to be willing to renegotiate loans with people, and as a result, you're seeing such a high level of foreclosures. I'm afraid, based upon the president's own standard, he has failed. He does not deserve a second term. You know, a patriot once said that a leader must lead, follow, or get out of the way. And we elected him to lead. He chose to follow, and now it's time for him to get out of the way. I actually think this election, however, is about more than just replacing President Obama. It's about the very soul of America.
Amen.
It's about what America is going to be, what the nature of our country will be for the coming generations. And I say that advisedly. You think about the debt that we are racking up right now. The people we have elected, from President Obama on down, every year are now spending over $1 trillion more than we take in. It's an unthinkable number. I mean, it's an unimaginable number. $1 trillion, 1,000 billions. And that burden is never going to be paid back by me or by you. It's going to have to be the interest on it, and the principal repayment will have to be paid by guys like this. What is he, about a 9-year-old? How old are you? How old? 5. Wow, he's only 5. Really? He's 8, okay. Anyone for 9? Okay. That's what's going to have to pay. And I frankly think it's not just bad economics and bad politics to keep spending more money than you take in. I think it's immoral. But the president seems to be willing to add trillion upon trillion upon trillion. So far, if he adds another trillion this year, he will have amassed as much debt, as much public debt, as all the prior presidents combined. Think of that, almost that level. Just unacceptable. In my view, we have to take a very different course in America. We can't go down that path. We have to say instead, we will cut federal spending, we will reduce its share of the total economy, and we will finally put America on track to have a balanced budget in this country. The president also has a very different view about energy. I share his desire to see our renewable resources developed. Green energy is something we can all aspire to see become more popular. Wind and solar and biofuels, and there are a number of things that are encouraging. But don't forget, we also have to have carbon-based fuels like natural gas and oil and coal. The president said in his State of the Union address the other night that he was in favor of all of the above. But then you look at the actions of his EPA, and they're really in favor of none of the above. And what they do is that they hold off the development of our coal through regulations and its use of coal. They hold off the development of our natural gas resources. They hold off the drilling for our oil. I will have an EPA that recognizes that part of their job is to help encourage the development of energy. My policy will be that America must be energy secure and energy independent. On an issue that touches all of us at some point in our life, our health care. Very personal issue. We have a president who thinks that that the federal government and its bureaucrats could do a better job managing health care and caring for us than we can care for ourselves with the advice of our doctors. And so he puts in place something known as Obamacare. And by the way, for our senior friends, now and then I go to rallies, one right here. You're older than 8 years old, so I want to ask you. For our senior friends, I see now and then signs that say, don't touch my Medicare, or don't touch my Social Security. And I totally agree with them. We're not going to touch those things. I only know one person who touched Medicare to the tune of $500 billion. Barack Obama. Yes. One more reason to get him out of office is that he took Medicare down $500 billion. And why? And why did he cut it $500 billion? To pay for Obamacare. Right. His view on health care is that government knows best. My view is we should return to the states the responsibility for caring for the uninsured. And
Repeal it.
Obamacare. This is a very enthusiastic Now, there are other issues of great significance where there's a huge divide between the president and I think the people of America. I want to see small business thrive. Yeah. I have started a small business myself that became a bigger business. I've run a big business. I understand how the economy works. And what I see right now is that we have put together a series of steps at the federal level which have made it harder and harder for small business to grow, to hire. This has been the most anti-jobs, anti-investment, anti-growth administration I've seen since Jimmy Carter. Regulations, for instance. The total burden of regulations. Now, these numbers are unthinkable numbers, but you know the government collects about $1.1 trillion a year in income tax from people and companies, about $1.1 trillion. But did you know that they also calculate the cost of regulation every year? I didn't know they did that. They calculated. The cost of regulation on our economy is estimated to be about $1.7 trillion a year, even bigger than all the tax we pay. And so what does President Obama do? He says he's going to put in place a program to cut regulation. He did that last summer. Boy, they worked hard. They came up by reducing regulations by 0.1%. If I'm president of the United States, I will stop the massive growth of regulation that's choking off American business and get American business. You know, I'm convinced that the president looks around the world and feels that America is in decline, that other nations are rising, and that the best way to try and protect the country is to go out to the world's worst actors and try and make friends. And then, of course, to make them happy by cutting our military spending. And that's the approach you see. You remember in his campaign, he said he'd sit down with Ahmadinejad and Chavez and Castro and Kim Jong-il. How'd that work out? Even those guys didn't want to meet with him. And my view is the right course for America is not to sit down with the world's worst actors, with tyrants and autocrats, but instead to stand firm for our values and to stand shoulder to shoulder with our allies. And I will do that. I don't know whether you are familiar with what's happened to our military over the last several years and what's planned. The president has announced $500 billion in cuts to military spending. Let me tell you, that's a good move. I appreciate that. But you know, the number of ships in our Navy is now lower than any time since 1917. That's something. The number of aircraft and the age of aircraft in our fleet is smaller and older than any time since the Air Force's founding in 1947. And you know how stretched our troops have been. You've seen the number of rotations of our National Guard and reserves and active duty personnel through these conflicts we've endured in Iraq and Afghanistan. And yet the president wants to cut our commitment to the military. My view is that's the wrong way to go. I will take our shipbuilding from 9 a year to 15. I'll increase our purchases of F-35s. I'll also make sure that we add 100,000 troops to our active duty personnel as opposed to cutting it. And I will finally give our veterans the care they deserve. The president says he wants to fundamentally transform America. I don't want to change us into something we're not. and haven't been. I want to restore the values that made America the economic powerhouse of the world.